So, I've got 3 stories lined up today. They're all completely different, but each one left me wondering what happened. I'll let you be the judge. Here's the first story. I don't tell people where I grew up. The town wasn't very big, and everyone knew everyone else's family going back generations. The area had a reputation that reached a lot farther than the town itself. They'd make comments about witches or curses whenever the place came up. Around there, though, people didn't really joke about that kind of thing. Whether they believed every story or not depended on the person, but it wasn't unusual to hear someone mention that a certain family practiced things they didn't talk about openly, or that somebody's grandmother knew old rituals. I grew up hearing those conversations, so none of it really stood out to me. It was just part of living there. I was in my early 20s when this happened. I lived with my parents. There wasn't much reason to move. Work was nearby. Housing somewhere else would have cost more money than it was worth. And I wasn't looking for city life. I worked long days, got home around dinner. Our house sat off the main road. Some days only a handful of vehicles passed by. Every house was separated by enough land. Most people who came down our road already had a reason to be there. You recognized nearly every vehicle. If somebody walked instead of driving, you see. Walking just wasn't practical there unless you lived nearby. I remember spending a lot of evenings sitting on our front porch after work because there wasn't much else to do before dinner. Sometimes I'd scroll through my phone if the signal happened to cooperate, or just sit there because being outside was nicer than sitting inside with the television running. One day I was doing exactly that when I saw a woman walking down the road. She was dressed entirely in black, plain black clothing from head to toe, long sleeves, long skirt, dark shoes. She slowed down when she reached our driveway. She walked over and asked if I knew where another family lived. She mentioned their last name first, then described the house when she noticed I wasn't answering right away. I knew exactly who she meant. Their place was another mile or so down the road, around a bend where you couldn't see it from ours. I pointed the direction out and explained she'd eventually come to a narrow dirt driveway. She smiled politely, thanked me, and kept walking. After she disappeared around the bend, I forgot about it. It wasn't interesting enough to think about again. A few days later, I saw her again. She was walking back along the same road. She didn't stop. She didn't even look toward the house. I recognized her because she was wearing the exact same clothes. I happened to be outside again, saw her walking past. She was moving at the same steady pace as before, head slightly down, hands together in front of her. She didn't seem lost. By then, I was wondering whether she knew someone nearby. I thought it was a little unusual that I'd seen the same woman twice on a road where almost nobody walked. 3 or 4 days passed. I went to work every day, came home tired, ate dinner with my parents, and spent the evenings doing whatever needed to be done around the property. We had a few chickens back then, and I'd usually check their feed before it got dark. My dad always insisted on locking one of the sheds. I only know it was after dinner because the dishes had already been washed. My parents were inside watching television. I was near the front of the house when someone knocked. I answered without thinking. The woman from the road was standing on our porch. Seeing her there surprised me. It was weird because she'd never come to the house before. She smiled the same way she had the first time we spoke. She asked if she could leave a heavy bag on our porch for a little while. She said she'd be back later to pick it up. I didn't really understand why she'd want to leave something at a stranger's house. I wondered if she'd hurt herself carrying it. I looked around, expecting to see a suitcase or grocery bag or a backpack sitting near her feet. There wasn't anything there. I looked behind her too. Nothing. I figured she'd already set it down somewhere I couldn't see. So I asked, "Where's the bag?" She said she'd go get it right now. Those were her exact words. She turned around and started walking away from the porch. I didn't know what to make of the conversation. If the bag was somewhere nearby already, why hadn't she brought it with her before asking? None of it made much sense. I closed the door and locked it. It felt strange enough that I didn't want to leave the house open waiting for someone I didn't know. I remember my mom asking who it had been. I told her it was the woman who'd asked for directions the week before. She asked what she wanted. My parents both looked confused. I figured she'd come back in a few minutes with whatever she'd been talking about. She never did. Hours went by. My parents went to bed earlier than I did because both of them got up before sunrise. It had to be around 4 hours later when another knock came from the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone to come by that late. Around there, if somebody showed up after dark, it was almost always someone you already knew. I walked toward the front door, but didn't open it this time. For whatever reason, because of the conversation I'd had with the woman earlier, I looked through the window beside the door first. There was a man standing on the porch. I'd never seen him before. He was standing there facing the door with his hands down by his sides. I asked through the door what he wanted. He didn't answer. I figured he hadn't heard me, so I spoke louder. Still nothing. He kept looking toward the house. After a few seconds, I asked again if he needed something. Instead of replying, he reached into his jacket. I thought he might be grabbing a phone or some paperwork if he was looking for directions. You know what? He pulled out a knife. It looked like a kitchen knife. He walked closer to the door. I backed away and yelled for my dad. The man suddenly kicked the door. It was just an ordinary wooden door. The first kick cracked something near the frame. He kicked it again. By then my dad was already coming down the hallway. I shouted that somebody was trying to get in. The man looked through the small window in the door and saw both of us standing inside. He stopped. He looked at both of us, turned around, walked off the porch, and disappeared into the darkness the same way he'd come. My dad opened one of the side curtains enough to watch him from the living room window while staying out of sight. We could see him walking down the road until it got too dark. After that, he was just gone. My mom had come into the living room by then asking what was happening because she'd heard all the noise. Once we explained it, she wanted to call a neighbor before doing anything else. Our nearest neighbors weren't close enough to hear someone kicking the door, but they answered the phone. My dad also called the police. That was the end of it. The woman, she wanted to leave a heavy bag on our porch. She'd come back later. The bag wasn't with her. She said she was going to get it. Then she disappeared. Nobody knocked again until the man showed up hours later. The woman had specifically picked our porch. She didn't ask if we knew where another house was this time. She didn't ask for help. She wanted to leave something there. Only there was never any bag. Then a man showed up with a knife. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Another thing that always bothered me was the man's reaction. He clearly intended to force his way inside. He'd already kicked the door hard enough to damage it. There were still only my dad and me between him and whatever he wanted. He had a knife, but he stood there like he was trying to figure something out and walked away. That never made sense to me for years. The only explanation I've ever come up with is that he expected somebody else to answer the door. Maybe he expected the woman, or like he expected something to be sitting on the porch. When he looked through the window and saw me instead, he realized he'd come to the wrong place. I have nothing to prove that. It's just the only thing that has ever fit. The woman asking about a bag that didn't exist has always felt connected. Almost like she wanted permission in advance to leave something there later. If she'd actually come back with a bag and we'd agreed to keep it until she returned, maybe the man would have shown up expecting to collect it, or he was supposed to pick it up before she got back. I realize how speculative all of that sounds. The truth is, I have no evidence those two people even knew each other. It could have been an unbelievable coincidence. Where I grew up, people naturally started connecting the story to all the old local folklore. Once neighbors heard about it, I got asked more than once if I thought the woman had been involved in witchcraft or some kind of ritual. Growing up, there meant hearing stories like that all the time, and I learned pretty early that once people decide something strange has a supernatural explanation, every detail suddenly becomes proof. I'd rather admit I don't know. Here's what happened. A woman I didn't know came to my house twice. The second time, she asked if she could leave a heavy bag on our porch, even though she wasn't carrying one. She walked away saying she'd be right back. She never returned. Hours later, a man I'd never seen before stood at our front door without saying a word, pulled out a knife, kicked the door hard enough to break part of the frame, looked inside, and left without taking another step. None of us ever saw either of them again. I wonder if the man really had gone to the wrong house. It still doesn't make any sense. I can explain a stranger asking for directions. I can even explain a violent person trying to break into a house. I still can't explain someone asking permission to leave something behind before they even had it. At the time, cheap mattered a lot more to me than where it was. I was 28, working full-time, and I had been trying to save enough money to buy something closer to town. It just happened to be out in a rural area where there weren't many neighbors. I could see one house off in the distance across a field, but it was far enough away that I couldn't make out much besides the roof. Most of the road was lined with trees, and after dark there weren't many people. I'd spent years living in apartments where someone was always stomping around upstairs or playing music through the walls. Living alone wasn't new to me. I'd been on my own for several years already. I'd get home around 5:30, feed my cat before she eventually passed away. I only had her for the first several months in that house. The layout of the house was simple, that you could see most of it from the living room. The kitchen opened into the living room, and a hallway led to the bedroom and bathroom. My bedroom door was almost always open unless I was sleeping, but sometimes I'd close it during the day. The house looked like hundreds of older houses I've seen since then. The previous owner had painted almost everything white, so the inside felt brighter than you'd expect. During the day, sunlight came into the living room through two large windows facing the front yard. The bedroom was different. It didn't have any windows. Technically, bedrooms are supposed to have windows, but this room had apparently been converted years before I rented it. I never asked many questions because I wasn't planning to stay there forever anyway. There was a vent for the air conditioning, a closet, one ceiling light, and the door leading into the hallway. That was it. It never really bothered me. If anything, it made sleeping easier because the room stayed completely dark. Work was repetitive. My supervisor liked to start conversations right before everyone was ready to leave, which drove all of us crazy. Sometimes I'd drive into town on Saturdays just to walk around stores without buying anything. The only downside was, at night, every sound stands out because there isn't constant traffic covering it up. Your brain starts recognizing what all those sounds are. This strange thing happened on a weeknight sometime toward the end of summer. I was sitting on the couch watching TV with the plate balanced on one of those folding tray tables people use when they don't have room for a dining table. The bedroom door was closed. I'd closed it before I started cooking. While I was eating, I saw what looked like light moving underneath the bedroom door. That didn't make sense because the bedroom didn't have windows. The hallway itself wasn't bright enough for that kind of reflection. I kept watching because I couldn't figure out what I was seeing. It would brighten for a second, fade away, and then come back again like someone inside the room was carrying a flashlight around near the floor. I was looking toward the living room windows because I thought somebody outside was shining something through the front of the house, but there wasn't anybody there. The television was still on, and I tried paying attention to it again for another minute or so, but every time I glanced back toward the hallway, I caught another flicker underneath the door. It lasted long enough that curiosity finally won. I walked over and opened the bedroom door, expecting to understand what I'd been seeing. The room was completely dark. Nothing electrical had fallen over. Nothing looked unusual except for my pillows. Both of them were lying on the floor beside the bed. It wasn't impossible. I picked them up, put them back on the bed, looked around for another minute just to satisfy myself that there wasn't anything else worth noticing, and went back into the living room. I didn't even tell anyone. If I'd called one of my friends and said my pillows were on the floor, they would have laughed. People forget things, like all the time. But the moving light, I couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation for it. Still, there had to be one, even if I couldn't think of it at the time. Weeks passed. Work stayed busy. I visited my parents once or twice, And I remember my mom asking whether I was still happy living by myself because she never liked the idea of me being so far away from everyone. I told her I was fine. As far as I knew, I was. About 2 months later, I unlocked the front door a little after 6 that evening, dropped my bag by the couch, and went into the bedroom to change out of my work clothes. It had been one of those days where everyone seemed irritated for no reason, so all I wanted was to get into sweatpants, make something easy for dinner, and not think about work until the next morning. The bed was made well enough. I had a laundry basket sitting beside the closet. Everything looked exactly the way I'd left it. I changed my clothes and walked back toward the living room. I had barely gotten halfway down the hallway when I heard someone speak behind me. It was a voice. I know you sometimes mistake televisions or radios for voices, and I would have assumed that myself if the TV had been on, but it wasn't. It sounded like someone saying a short sentence from inside the bedroom. Sometimes when you're tired after work, your brain fills in sounds that aren't really there. I've had moments where I thought my phone vibrated in my pocket when it hadn't. I turned around and looked straight into the bedroom. There wasn't anyone there. Nothing happened. I checked the closet. It was too small for anyone to hide comfortably. I looked under the bed. There wasn't much space underneath because the frame sat fairly low to the floor. But I looked anyway. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard somebody. I ended up calling one of my closest friends because I didn't know what else to do. It was almost like hearing people talking in another room where you can tell someone is speaking, but the words blend together. She asked whether someone could have broken into the house. I said I didn't think so because there wasn't anywhere for someone to hide, but once she mentioned it, that became difficult to ignore. She said she'd come over. While she was driving, she suggested calling another friend of ours because he was a lot more comfortable checking things like crawl spaces or sheds than either of us were. He laughed when I explained, in the way someone laughs because they're trying to make you feel less nervous. I reminded him the bedroom didn't have windows. That made him pause. When they both got there, we checked everything together. He looked through every room, went outside. There wasn't anyone. He said he couldn't explain the voice, but there wasn't any sign that somebody had been inside. The next morning, I felt weird. Having other people come over because I thought I'd heard something made me feel like I'd overreacted. When I talked to my friend later, she told me she would have done the same thing if she'd been alone. Months went by. Around 4 months after hearing the voice, I had stopped thinking about it altogether. It was another weekday evening. It had started getting darker earlier because summer was ending. I'd eaten dinner and was sitting in the living room watching TV. I was scrolling through my phone more than watching TV. Every once in a while, I'd look up at the screen before going back to reading messages. For some reason, I started feeling like someone was looking at me. I mean, that strange instinct people sometimes get where they suddenly look behind them for no obvious reason. I've had that happen in grocery stores too. Usually there's nothing there. This time, I looked toward the hallway. The bedroom door was open. Standing just inside the bedroom was a man. I didn't catch a quick glimpse. I saw him clearly. He had long dark hair that came down around his shoulders, and he was looking at me. I can't tell you what he was wearing because my attention went straight to his face. I thought someone had somehow gotten into my house while I was distracted. I screamed before I even had time to think, ran for the front door. Once I got outside, I kept looking through the front windows toward the living room. The only exit from the bedroom would have brought him through the hallway into the living room before reaching the front door. I stood there expecting him to appear at any second, and I called my friend fast. She told me not to go back inside. I never took my eyes off the front of the house. Nothing came out. Nobody climbed through a window. Nothing. She called our other friend while she was driving over. I kept thinking about the layout of the house. There wasn't another exit. The bedroom had no window. The bathroom window was tiny and much too small for an adult to fit through. If that had been an actual person, I couldn't figure out how he could have left without walking through the living room where I would have seen him. When my friends arrived, they parked sideways in the driveway because they were in such a hurry. Our male friend went inside first while we stayed outside. He checked every room again, opened every closet, looked under the bed. Nothing. He came back shaking his head. It was a person. I was looking directly at him. There wasn't any confusion about what I saw. The confusing part was where he went. My friends convinced me to spend the night at one of their houses. I packed a small bag as quickly as I could while they waited inside with me. Nothing else happened that night. I went back to the house the following day because all of my things were still there. I told myself I wasn't going to let one strange experience force me out of a place I could actually afford. I lasted about another week. During that week, I barely slept. I'd leave lights on in different rooms because the darkness started making me uncomfortable in a way it never had before. I decided saving money wasn't worth feeling anxious every time I came home from work. I've been asked a lot over the years whether I think what I saw was a ghost. I don't know. Maybe there was a person, although I still can't explain how he could have disappeared without coming through the living room. The light under the bedroom door, the voice months later, and finally seeing someone standing there all happened in the same house. It's been years, and I've lived in other places since then without anything remotely similar happening. That time I was staring through the front windows, waiting for him to walk into the living room because I was completely certain he had to. I watched that doorway the entire time until my friends arrived. Nobody ever came out. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't know why it only ever happened in that one house. I met her through a friend from work. He was having a small get-together at his apartment one Saturday night, and 10 or 12 people hanging around. He kept texting me saying everyone was asking where I was. She was sitting on the balcony talking with a couple of people when I got there. She was pretty quiet compared to everyone else. We ended up talking because someone brought up camping, and she mentioned she'd gone a lot growing up. I liked that she seemed easy to talk to. She asked questions instead of talking about herself the whole time, and by the end of the night we'd exchanged numbers. I was 26, working full-time for a shipping company. Monday through Friday, home by 5 most days unless something got delayed. I lived alone. It was close to work and affordable. Dating wasn't really something I put much effort into before meeting her. I'd gone on a few dates over the previous couple of years, but nothing ever turned into a relationship. With her, things happened pretty quickly. We'd go out for dinner after work, watch movies at my apartment, or just drive around. She worked at an office. I remember she'd always complain about one particular patient who canceled appointments almost every week. It became kind of a running joke whenever she'd get a text from work. She got along with my friends surprisingly fast. Usually people need a while before they're comfortable around a new group, but after a couple weekends, everyone treated her like she'd been around forever. I don't remember anyone saying they thought she was strange or giving me any warnings. If someone had, I would have paid attention. There were little things that stood out, but they didn't happen all at once. She'd sometimes stop paying attention during conversations. We'd be watching TV or talking while making dinner, and she'd look past me for a few seconds like she'd heard someone say something. I'd ask if everything was okay, and she'd answer right away like nothing happened. I figured everybody spaces out. I know I do. A couple weeks later, she talked to herself. It wasn't like she carried on full conversations in front of me. It happened quietly enough that I wasn't even sure I'd heard her correctly the first couple times. I'd be in another room grabbing something or walking back from the bathroom, and I'd hear her mumbling. By the time I walked in, she'd already stopped. I asked who she was talking to. She laughed and said she'd been thinking out loud. People do that. I do it sometimes when I'm looking for my keys. One afternoon, we were grocery shopping together. I was comparing prices on coffee because I was trying to spend less money back then, and she wandered a few feet away looking at something else. When I caught up to her, she was quietly saying something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words. I asked if she'd said something. She looked surprised to see me standing there and just smiled. No. She never acted hostile or aggressive. She was affectionate, funny, and normal most of the time. Another thing that started happening was she'd wake up tired almost every morning. Not just tired in the normal sense. She'd say she barely slept because she'd been having strange dreams, although she could never explain what they were about. I'd ask what happened in the dream, and she'd just say she couldn't remember anymore. After hearing that enough times, I suggested she wasn't sleeping well because she stayed on her phone too late. She agreed, and even started putting her phone away earlier. Nothing changed. One Friday, she came over after work while I was making dinner. I decided to try cooking pork chops, even though I wasn't very good at cooking anything besides pasta and burgers. I'd bought extra meat since they were on sale, planning to freeze what I didn't use. While I was seasoning everything, I realized I'd forgotten the potatoes I'd left in my car after stopping at the grocery store. My apartment parking lot was only about 30 seconds away, so I told her I'd be right back. When I came inside 2 minutes later, she was standing by the kitchen counter. She had one of the uncooked pork chops in her hand. She'd taken a bite out of it. She was chewing it. I asked, "What are you doing?" She looked at me like I'd interrupted. She laughed and said, "It's a joke." I remember asking who the joke was for because we were the only people there. She laughed again, threw the meat back onto the cutting board, washed her hands, and acted like nothing had happened. The weird part wasn't even that she laughed. It was that there wasn't really any embarrassment. If I accidentally did something strange and someone caught me, I'd probably try explaining myself. She just moved on. I threw that pork chop away and cooked the others. I asked if she'd eaten anything earlier because maybe her blood sugar was low or I don't know. She said she was fine. Dinner was good after that. We watched a movie. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder halfway through. I mentioned it to the friend who introduced us as a joke. I even asked if she'd ever had any mental health issues that he knew about. He said no. As far as he knew, she'd always been normal. If you take enough little weird moments from anybody's life and put them together, they can sound much stranger than they actually are. That's what I'm telling myself. Over the next week, things settled down again. We went out for tacos one night. She came over another evening and helped me rearrange furniture because I'd bought a bigger TV stand. She teased me because I measured the wall a few different times before hanging anything. It felt like whatever awkward phase we'd gone through had passed. But one night, everything fell apart so quickly that even now I have trouble remembering the exact order certain things happened. She stayed over at my apartment on a Thursday. We watched a movie in bed. I think I fell asleep before it even finished. The next thing I remember is waking up because she screamed. It took me a second to understand where I was because I'd been asleep pretty hard. She was sitting straight up in bed, staring toward the bedroom door. She kept saying there was a man in the apartment. I didn't see anyone. I got out of bed because whether I believed I'd seen somebody or not, I wasn't going to ignore someone screaming that there was an intruder. I checked the living room. Nothing. Kitchen. Nothing. Bathroom. Nothing. Every window I checked looked the same as when we'd gone to bed. I came back into the bedroom and told her I didn't see anybody. Instead of calming down, she got angry. She kept insisting I'd walked right past him. I told her she'd had a nightmare because she'd talked before about having bad dreams. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was like she thought I was lying to her. She kept asking why I was pretending he wasn't there. I said, "Because there's nobody here." She said, "You're him." She repeated it. "No, you're the man." I was saying something like, "What are you talking about?" She walked straight past me into the kitchen. I figured she was getting her phone. I heard a drawer open. When I stepped into the hallway, she was holding one of my kitchen knives. It was the chef's knife I used for pretty much everything. I told her to put it down. She didn't even look at the knife. She just kept staring at me. She said something I don't understand. It was along the lines of, "You don't get to wear his face." I had no idea what that meant. She started walking. I backed away. I still didn't think she was actually going to hurt me. I kept trying to talk to her. I told her to stop. I asked what was wrong. She never answered any of it. She kept coming toward me holding the knife. I backed into the bedroom because it was the closest room. I don't think I was making some smart decision in the moment. I remember telling her to stop over and over, and I kept expecting her to snap out of whatever was happening. We'd been dating for over a month, and even with all the odd things I'd noticed, I'd never once thought she was capable of hurting somebody. She crossed the doorway without slowing down. The knife wasn't pointed straight at me like you see in movies. She was just holding it down by her side, and she wasn't letting go of it. Her voice got quiet, almost like she was talking to someone standing behind me. She kept saying things that didn't really fit together. "He's still here. I know what you're doing. You can't keep pretending." None of it made any sense to me. I kept answering her because I thought if I could just keep her talking, she'd calm down. I asked who she thought she was talking about. I asked if she'd hit her head or if she'd taken something. Every question seemed to make her more frustrated. She looked directly at me and said, "Stop using his voice." I stopped thinking this was just someone waking up from a nightmare. I moved back into the bedroom and shut the door before she could get all the way inside. She pushed against it. I got the lock turned just before she reached the handle. I leaned against it with my shoulder while trying to get my phone out of my pocket. She kept trying the handle. She was talking the whole time, but it wasn't loud enough for me to catch every word. She'd sound like she was arguing with somebody. I called the cops. Some point I heard the knife hit the floor. I was wondering if she'd dropped it on purpose, and I heard her laughing. She'd laugh for a second, stop, mumble something, then laugh again. The dispatcher told me officers had arrived and asked if I could safely leave the room. I told them I wasn't opening the door until an officer told me to. They brought her out. She asked me why the police were there. I didn't even know how to answer. One of her relatives reached out and apologized for everything. They said she'd experienced something similar years earlier and had stopped taking medication not long before we met. I don't know if that was the whole story or only part of it. I'd never been around someone experiencing that kind of mental health crisis before. Most people probably haven't. I assumed someone having a mental health episode would always look obviously out of control. That wasn't my experience. For weeks, she seemed like the exact same person I'd met. We went on dates, we joked around, we watched movies, we made plans for things we wanted to do over the summer. If you'd met her during one of those normal days, you would have thought she was perfectly fine. It was scary because I went to bed next to someone I trusted. Maybe there really was a dream she couldn't wake up from right away. Whatever happened, I don't think she was pretending. I feel bad for her as much as I feel scared when I remember it. She must have been terrified if she genuinely believed there was a man inside the apartment. I just happened to be the person standing there when everything fell apart.